Hey Wisecrack, Jared here. Today we're boldly going where lots of people have gone before. We're talking about Star Trek.
Emergency invasive!
And before you all have a collective shit fit, we're mostly focusing on the Star Trek reboot. Not because it's better, but because there's just way too much original Star Trek to cover in one episode. Anyway, the original Star Trek and its subsequent 8 billion spin-offs followed the adventures of the Starship Enterprise as it explored the depths of the Milky Way galaxy. Set roughly 400 years into the future from its 1966 airdate, Star Trek was a radical imagining of the future, one where humanity's prized starship is manned by a Russian, a Japanese American, a black woman, an interracial alien, and this guy.
I'm Captain!
The original Star Trek was based in humanism, a philosophy that is characterized by a profound faith in the innate goodness of humans and their ability to be rational. For creator Gene Roddenberry, humanity may well have a few growing pains, but will eventually grow up to be a responsible civilization without war or poverty. Part of this utopian vision of the future was an unapologetic stance towards cosmopolitanism. Not only did the show unite disparate races and nationalities on the bridge of the Enterprise, like including a Russian as part of the crew during the height of the Cold War, but the Wild West of space served as a backdrop to play out morality tales focusing on the dangers of ruthless dogmatism, foreign intervention, and racism. Even humanity's history is frequently maligned, with constant references to the numerous and pointless wars of the 20th century, and the tendency for us as a species to act like a bunch of petulant children armed with nuclear weapons. But if the original Star Trek was about embracing cosmopolitanism,
Fire everything!
the new J.J. Abrams version is about reacting to the ramifications of that world. The J.J. Abrams Star Trek takes place in an alternate timeline that's created when an elder Spock tries to stop a supernova that's threatening to destroy the entire galaxy before it reaches the Romulan homeworld. It doesn't really make sense, so don't bother. Spock fails to save Romulus in time, but does eventually create a black hole to consume the supernova, which hurtles him and a revenge-driven Eric Bana back in time. The old Star Trek used to ask really hard moral questions, like how can we put aside personal hatred with an enemy civilization for the greater good?
Don't trust them. They're dying.
Or should we interfere in the natural development of a civilization? New Star Treks, however, are about interstellar temper tantrums and space terrorists in the spirit of our modern political climate. Nero, who blames the Vulcans for the death of his planet, gets all genocidal with a weapon of mass destruction, and Khan, in the ultimate act of friendship, has a guy blow up a research facility and goes on a killing spree. In other words, if the older Star Treks imagined the promise of a united humanity and its technological advancements, the new Star Treks imagine how scary all of that sounds. Miners who can drill holes into planets, fuel sources that can devour civilizations, time travel that still can't bring back William Shatner? No thanks, science. But let's not get too grumpy. Behind all the nerd rage-inducing nonsense, there is something to be learned. One carryover through the original series is the famous Spock phrase,
"The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few."
For most, this is a pretty uncontroversial position. It's also one of the basic premises of utilitarianism, a philosophy promoted by English philosopher Jeremy Bentham that promoted behavior to bring the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest amount of people. Bentham, of course, turned his back on this principle when he decided to mummify his own body, thus providing nightmare fuel for centuries of humans to come. Oh, God. But I digress. Spock is more or less a utilitarian.
The sentient being's optimal chance at maximizing their utility is a long and prosperous life.
In fact, in Star Trek Into Darkness, the film goes to great lengths to show you what a dick move the alternative is. A guy murders a building full of innocent people to save his daughter, Khan will do all sorts of murdering to save his fellow superhumans, and even Nero in Star Trek will try to exterminate the entire Federation in hopes of averting the loss of the Romulan people. But despite these cinematic instances of black and white morality, there are a lot of arguments that throw this idea into question, even if Spock claims it's only logical.
Just logical.
Philosophers love to argue about the trolley problem. If you're unfamiliar, it's a thought experiment where you find yourself about to witness a group of people get mowed down by a train barreling towards them. Luckily for the thought experiment, you're in reach of a lever that can divert the train to another track. On that track is just one person. Do you pull the lever, thus killing one person to save multiple? Many would pull the lever, but it still feels icky. You've decided that the needs of many outweigh the needs of the few, but then again, now it's directly your fault that someone is dead. Other versions of the trolley problem complicate this decision further, but in a much more uncomfortable way. Would you push a fat dude on the track because he's sufficiently large to slow down the train and allow the group to escape? What if Fatty was a cancer researcher? What if the group of people you're saving was actually the cast of The Big Bang Theory? The variations, as you may have guessed, continue ad nauseum. Determining the good of the many over the few, it turns out, is really hard. If pulling the lever is permissible, what about killing someone to donate their organs to 5 people in need? In Star Trek, we see a different thought experiment, a simulation in which a captain is forced to die trying to save a stranded crew of civilians, or give up and look like an asshole. The Kobayashi Maru, as it appears to cadets, poses a dilemma similar to the trolley problem. Can you justify sacrificing your crew in the hopes of saving a ship of civilians? As it's later revealed, failure is inevitable in the Kobayashi Maru. It's a rigged game. By doing this, the simulation shifts a lesson about ethics into a lesson about human fallibility and accepting no-win scenarios. In other words, it's a trolley problem where everybody dies every time. Rather than try to offer a moral solution to either problem, the film finds its answer in Captain Kirk, who just cheats.
I don't believe in no-win scenarios.
But in good storytelling fashion, this avoidance comes to bite Kirk in the ass when he encounters a real no-win scenario. In The Wrath of Khan, he loses his best friend.
I have been, and always shall be, your friend.
And in Into Darkness, he sacrifices himself. So what's the lesson here? If your answer is the needs of many outweigh the needs of the few, well then hold on a second. Because the other premise of the Khan storyline is that utilitarianism, you know, that needs of the many idea, is kind of what bred tyrannical Khan in the first place. While Khan was a dictator who robbed people of freedom, he also managed to eliminate war under his reign.
We offered the world order.
Does saving hundreds of thousands of lives from the devastation of war justify the loss of freedom, especially when only a handful of whiners are actually missing it? Star Trek, in one moment, will preach the merits of being human and all the value we ascribe to institutions like friendship and family, and in another moment will show us people murdering other people for the sake of friendship and family. The same could also be said about the purely logical alternative. While Spock is celebrated for his cold logic,
Fascinating.
plenty of Star Trek episodes show just how stupid cold logic can be. That's one of the great things about Star Trek. Instead of strongly espousing one philosophy, it dives headfirst into moral ambiguity. German philosopher Hannah Arendt warns of the dangers of pure utilitarian thought. As she says, the crimes against human rights can always be justified by the pretext that right is equivalent to being good or useful for the whole in distinction to its parts. This predicament is by no means solved if the unit for which the good for applies is as large as mankind itself, for it is quite conceivable that one fine day a highly organized and mechanized humanity will conclude quite democratically.
The line must be drawn here.
Despite Spock's assertion that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, Star Trek as a series is critical of such easy answers. Like Arendt, the show often warned against the dangers of pure utilitarian thought. In the Next Generation series, for instance, the most powerful and frightening enemy of the Federation is the Borg, a cybernetic hive mind that perfectly illustrates why Arendt was convinced that a highly organized and mechanized humanity was such a frightening prospect.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
What makes the Borg so terrifying is how, with a cold utilitarian logic, the collective excludes the needs of the few as it works out the most efficient way to serve the needs of all. According to a purely utilitarian argument, Nero might have been a stand-up guy. You could argue that, had Vulcan never existed, the Romulans would have never placed their faith in Spock. A strong Romulan empire without the interference of Vulcan might have been able to avert the disaster, and boom, genocide justified.
To create Romulus exists. Free of the Federation.
If Romulus is a planet with 18 billion people, as some Star Trek sources suggest, and Vulcan is a planet of 6 billion people, then why not? Thankfully, Star Trek subtly answers this question. If you look at Star Trek Into Darkness, it opens with 2 explosions. One to save a civilization, the other to save a child. In every utilitarian decision made by Spock and Kirk in both Into Darkness and The Wrath of Khan, the sacrificing of one for the many is always a personal choice. The 2009 Star Trek even begins with Kirk's father piloting his ship on a crash course so that his crew, wife, and child can escape. And this neatly avoids Hannah Arendt's warnings of the dangers of pure mechanistic utilitarianism. If you want to sacrifice one life for many, sacrifice your own fucking life. Now, that's just one solution given to one thought experiment in a franchise that includes over 700 episodes of television and a dozen movies. George Lucas once described his rival franchise as the little engine that could, as it survived for over a decade on fan enthusiasm alone. One of the reasons it survived and why it eventually spawned so many different reboots, sequels, and prequels is because it tackles the difficulties of modern life, the problems that come along with a world that is so clearly more and more cosmopolitan every day, so directly. We've only scratched the surface of philosophical topics in Star Trek. There's the Prime Directive, space fascists, omnipotent beings, and so many other angles to cover. So if you want to hear more, let us know in the comments. Hey everyone, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. We literally have hundreds of videos like these on our channel, so give George Takei a poke to be taken to our channel page where you can find your next video to watch and subscribe. We've got exciting new breakdowns of The Joker, Mr. Robot, Pokemon Go, and South Park around the corner, so make sure you subscribe to be notified the minute they drop. Also, if you've got a spare minute, click here to check out our Patreon page. Every patron helps us keep making great videos for y'all. And look, if you're a fan of Wisecrack, you're gonna love the videos made by my friend Evan, aka the Nerd Writer. Evan creates top-notch video essays each week diving into understanding art, movies, politics, music, and so much more. Click right here, or use the link in the description below to visit the Nerd Writer's channel page and subscribe. And hey, leave a comment on one of his videos and tell him Wisecrack sent you. I'm telling you, it's a great channel and you're gonna wanna subscribe. Alright, I've got a ton of work to get back to. Until next time, peace.